For more than 8 decades, the American psyche has been anchored by a silent and seemingly unbreakable promise forged between the individual and the federal government. You dedicate your best years to the workforce, you diligently pay your payroll taxes, and in return, the system guarantees a dignified lifestyle when your working days are done. This social contract is perceived as a foundational truth of modern life, a psychological safety net that provides a sense of certainty in an otherwise volatile world. We have been conditioned to view those mandatory deductions on every paycheck as a sacred deposit into a personal vault, a fortress of security that will eventually protect us from the harsh realities of old age and economic instability. Yet, a chilling reality is now emerging from the hallowed halls of the Social Security Administration, revealing that this fortress may actually be built on shifting sands. Official projections now indicate that by 2033, the combined asset reserves of the retirement trust funds will be completely depleted, triggering an automatic and devastating reduction in monthly benefits for millions of retirees. This is not merely a pessimistic forecast or a piece of political theater, but a stark mathematical certainty backed by the latest government data. The sudden realization that 20% of your expected income could vanish into thin air creates a visceral sense of betrayal for those who have spent 40 years playing by the rules of a game that is now changing its terms at the last minute. If I were to tell you that the retirement check you have been promised for your entire working life might be slashed just when you need it most, would you continue to blindly trust the system, or would you finally start taking control of your own destiny? This looming crisis serves as a brutal awakening for a generation that has been lulled into a false sense of security by the perceived permanence of government institutions. Understanding this illusion is the first step toward reclaiming your financial sovereignty as we begin to look past the comforting narratives and confront the cold, hard numbers that define the next decade of American life. The fundamental architecture of the Social Security system was designed during an era of vastly different demographic realities, a time when the life expectancy of an average worker barely exceeded the age of retirement itself. In 1945, there were 42 workers contributing for every single beneficiary receiving a check, creating a massive surplus that made the system appear invincible and eternally sustainable for future generations. Today, that ratio has plummeted to a precarious 2.8 workers for every retiree, and it is projected to drop even further as the massive baby boomer generation continues to exit the workforce and enter the ranks of the supported. This mathematical erosion is not a result of individual laziness or a lack of character, but rather a systemic shift in the very foundation of how our society is structured, and how longevity has fundamentally altered the original equation. Beyond the cold numbers lies a deeper psychological phenomenon known as institutional dependency, which lulls individuals into a state of financial passivity by promising a safety net that feels more like a guaranteed inheritance than a supplemental insurance policy. We are biologically wired for hyperbolic discounting, a cognitive bias that leads us to prioritize immediate consumption over distant security, making it incredibly difficult to save for a future that feels abstract and uncertain. The existence of a government-mandated retirement program acts as a psychological sedative, convincing millions that they do not need to take radical responsibility for their own wealth because a benevolent authority will eventually provide for their basic needs. This reliance creates a dangerous bystander effect in personal finance, where individuals wait for a systemic solution to a problem that requires urgent, personal intervention before the clock runs out on their earning years. What is actually silently controlling your money, and why are young people paying for a party they might never attend, is a question that reveals the inherent flaws in a pay-as-you-go funding model. Unlike a private investment account where your contributions are invested in productive assets that grow over time, Social Security taxes are immediately redistributed to pay for the benefits of current retirees, leaving the system vulnerable to any change in the workforce's size. The so-called trust fund is not a vault filled with stacks of $100 bills, but rather a collection of special issue government bonds that represent a promise to pay future benefits through even more taxes or increased national debt. For the younger generations, every dollar taken from their paycheck today is not an investment in their own future, but a subsidy for a previous generation's lifestyle, leaving them with the high probability of a 20% reduction in benefits by the time they are eligible to claim their own share. This systemic vulnerability is exacerbated by the modern dopamine-driven consumer culture that encourages us to spend every cent of our disposable income on fleeting status symbols, instead of long-term capital accumulation. We are trapped in a cycle of lifestyle inflation where our desires expand to meet our earnings, leaving us with no margin for error and an absolute reliance on the very government systems that are currently flashing warning signs of imminent failure. The true root cause of the crisis is a combination of demographic inevitability and a psychological refusal to acknowledge that the era of passive retirement security is coming to an end. To survive the transition into the mid-2030s, one must first dismantle the illusion that the system is working in their favor and recognize that the only person truly capable of securing their financial future is the one they see in the mirror every morning. What core mathematical formula will completely change your financial game when 20% of your income vanishes overnight? To understand the gravity of the 2033 cliff, we must look at the compounding effect of a forced pay cut on your quality of life through the lens of cold, hard subtraction. If an average retiree expects $2,500 per month but receives only $2,000 due to trust fund depletion, that $500 monthly deficit translates to $6,000 a year in lost income. Over a 20-year retirement period, this equals a staggering $120,000 in lost purchasing power, not even accounting for the erosive force of inflation, which the Federal Reserve historically targets at 2%. This is not just a minor inconvenience, but a fundamental breakdown of the math required to cover essential costs like housing and the rising price of private medical care in the United States. The mechanics of the Social Security Trust Fund are often misunderstood as a literal pile of cash sitting in a vault, but in reality, it operates as a ledger of special issue government bonds. When you compare the internal rate of return of Social Security to the historical performance of the S&P 500, which has provided an average annual return of approximately 10% over several decades, the disparity is shocking to any rational investor. If the average worker were able to redirect their payroll contributions into a diversified index fund managed by institutions like Vanguard or Fidelity, the resulting terminal wealth would often be triple or quadruple what the government promise provides. This illustrates the massive opportunity cost of remaining passive within a crumbling system that yields a return barely keeping pace with the cost of living while exposing you to significant legislative risk and benefit volatility. True financial liberation is found in the simple but profound math of compound growth and the systematic accumulation of productive assets that you own and control. By applying the rule of 72, we can see that an investment growing at a 10% rate will double every 7.2 years, creating a geometric expansion of wealth that far outstrips any state-funded pension scheme. When you reach a critical mass where your assets generate more income than your labor through dividends and capital gains, you have effectively built your own private social security system that is immune to the whims of politicians. This shift from a consumer mindset to a capital owner mindset is the only mathematical certainty that can bridge the 20% gap and provide a margin of safety for the uncertain decades that lie ahead of us. Visualizing your money as a fleet of tireless workers that never sleep or take vacations allows you to see the true potential of automated investing through vehicles like a 401k or a Roth IRA. A modest monthly contribution of $500 when compounded over 30 years at an 8% return grows into a mountain of capital exceeding $740,000 according to standard financial modeling. This is the mechanics of change that turns a victim of a system failure into a master of their own economic fate, providing the leverage needed to ignore the headlines and focus on long-term prosperity. However, understanding the math is only half the battle, as the greatest obstacle to implementing these changes is not a lack of intelligence, but the deep-seated psychological barriers that prevent us from seeing the world as it truly is. What is the true difference in the mindset of wealth? To answer this question, we must first dismantle the prevailing cultural narrative that equates being rich with the ability to consume expensive goods and services in the present moment. True wealth is not a collection of depreciating liabilities like luxury vehicles or designer wardrobes, but rather the silent accumulation of assets that provide the ultimate currency, which is time. When you view money through the lens of freedom, every dollar you save is no longer a sacrifice of today's pleasure, but the successful purchase of a future hour where you no longer have to trade your life energy for a paycheck. This fundamental shift in perspective transforms the act of investing from a chore into a revolutionary act of self-liberation from a system that is currently showing signs of structural failure and demographic exhaustion. The psychological barrier known as the scarcity mindset often traps individuals in a state of perpetual anxiety, where they perceive the world as a zero-sum game with limited resources. This mindset is what drives the frantic reliance on government promises like Social Security, because it assumes that the individual is incapable of creating their own economic security through strategic planning and discipline. In contrast, a mindset of abundance and strategic growth recognizes that while the federal government faces a fiscal cliff in 2033, the global economy continues to offer unprecedented opportunities for those who own the means of production through equity markets. By shifting your identity from a dependent recipient to an active capitalist, you begin to see market volatility not as a threat to your survival, but as a mechanism for long-term wealth creation that rewards those with the patience to wait for the power of compounding to manifest. Understanding the concept of opportunity cost is the bridge that carries a person from financial instability to a position of unassailable strength. Every financial decision you make carries a hidden price tag that extends far beyond the initial transaction, as money spent today on a non-essential luxury is essentially a theft from your future self. For example, spending $50,000 on a new car today might seem like a standard middle-class milestone, but the opportunity cost of that capital, if invested in an index fund for 20 years at a 7% return, is nearly $200,000 of lost potential wealth. When you begin to calculate the future value of every dollar before you spend it, your relationship with consumption changes from one of impulsive desire to one of calculated strategic investment, where you prioritize your long-term autonomy over fleeting social status. Many people hesitate to embrace a lifestyle of delayed gratification because they fear looking poor in the eyes of their peers, while they are actually becoming wealthy in the eyes of their bank account. This social pressure creates a trap where individuals spend their entire working lives running on a treadmill of increasing expenses just to maintain an image of success that is entirely hollow. The strategic mindset chooses to embrace a perceived poverty in the present, such as driving an older vehicle or living in a modest home, in order to buy back the right to retire a decade earlier than the masses. This is not a life of deprivation, but a life of intentionality, where you realize that the most expensive thing you can ever buy is your own freedom from the requirement to work for a corporation or depend on a government check. We must also confront the reality of cognitive dissonance, where people ignore the warning signs of the 2033 Social Security depletion because the truth is too uncomfortable to process. The mind naturally seeks the path of least resistance, preferring the comforting lie of a guaranteed pension over the difficult truth that self-reliance is the only path forward. Breaking this cycle requires a radical acceptance of the current economic environment and a willingness to stop blaming external factors for your internal financial state. By taking full ownership of your financial outcomes, You move from being a victim of policy changes in Washington to being the primary architect of your own destiny, capable of thriving regardless of what happens to the trust fund reserves. The difference between those who will suffer in 2033 and those who will prosper lies in their ability to see the world as a series of probabilities rather than certainties. While the government might find a way to patch the system through higher taxes or increased borrowing, a strategic thinker builds their plan on the assumption that no help is coming. This defensive posture paradoxically leads to an offensive wealth-building strategy that results in a much higher standard of living than any government program could ever provide. You are essentially building a private insurance policy against the incompetence of the state, ensuring that your family's well-being is never subject to a vote in a polarized Congress or a budget negotiation in a distant capital. Ultimately, the shift from a consumer mindset to a strategic mindset is a journey from psychological fragility to financial anti-fragility. In a state of fragility, any disruption to the system, like a 20% cut in Social Security, leads to a total collapse of your lifestyle and personal stability. In a state of anti-fragility, you have built such a robust foundation of diverse assets and low overhead that even a significant systemic shock becomes a minor footnote in your overall success story. As we move from the philosophy of wealth to the practical application of these principles, the focus shifts to the specific tactical maneuvers that will allow you to execute this transformation in the real world. This leads us to the critical question. Once you have the right mindset, what are the exact steps you must take to secure your future before the clock strikes midnight on the current system? Exactly what steps must you take the moment you turn off this video to ensure your financial survival? The first and most critical action is to automate your financial discipline before your human fallibility has a chance to intervene by establishing a systematic transfer of at least 15 to 20% of your gross income into a separate investment account. This strategy utilizes the core concept of paying yourself first, which forces your lifestyle to adapt to the remaining portion of your earnings rather than trying to save what is left at the end of the month after all your desires have been met. By removing the need for constant willpower and manual decision-making, you create an unstoppable momentum that builds your private safety net, regardless of market volatility or the latest alarming news regarding the future of federal benefits. Once your automated savings mechanism is functional, you must strategically direct those funds into tax-advantaged vehicles, such as an employer-sponsored 401k plan or a Roth IRA, to maximize the efficiency of every dollar you earn. If your employer offers a matching contribution, you must view this as a guaranteed 100% return on your investment that no other asset class in the world can consistently provide. For those worried about the 2033 cliff, the Roth IRA is particularly powerful because it allows you to grow your wealth tax-free and withdraw it without being subject to future income tax hikes that may be implemented to save the Social Security system from total collapse. You should prioritize low-cost broad market index funds that track the S&P 500 or the total stock market, ensuring that you are capturing the growth of the largest and most profitable companies in the world. The final pillar of your immediate action plan is the construction of a robust emergency fund consisting of 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses held in a high-yield savings account that is easily accessible. This liquidity acts as a psychological buffer that prevents you from having to liquidate your long-term investments during a market downturn or a personal financial setback like a sudden job loss or medical emergency. Simultaneously, you must aggressively eliminate all high-interest consumer debt, particularly credit cards that charge interest rates exceeding 20%, as these are the primary anchors holding back your total net worth and stealing your future purchasing power. Every dollar you pay toward a credit card balance provides a risk-free return equal to the interest rate you are no longer paying, effectively freeing up more capital to be funneled into your wealth-building machine for the next several decades. These steps are not mere suggestions but a mandatory survival protocol for anyone who intends to maintain their standard of living in a post-2033 reality where government support is significantly diminished. The beauty of this approach is that it relies entirely on your own agency and the established laws of finance, rather than the shifting political winds of a legislative election cycle or a budget negotiation in a distant capital. As you begin to see your personal balances grow and your reliance on an external safety net shrink, you will experience a profound sense of peace that no government promise can ever replicate for its citizens. However, even with the most perfect plan, there are hidden dangers and psychological traps that can sabotage your progress and drag you back into the cycle of dependency if you are not constantly vigilant about your behavior and environment. The ultimate trap that could throw you back to the very beginning of your financial journey is the insidious phenomenon of lifestyle inflation, which silently erodes the foundation of your future wealth as your income increases over time. We are biologically predisposed to seek higher levels of comfort and social status, leading many to upgrade their homes, vehicles, and daily expenses the moment they achieve a small measure of success in their career or a modest gain in their investment portfolio. This behavioral pattern ensures that no matter how much you earn or how well your assets perform, you remain perpetually trapped in a state of financial fragility because your overhead always expands to consume your entire surplus. To avoid this sugar-coated mousetrap, you must consciously decouple your standard of living from your earning power, maintaining a consistent level of consumption while directing every additional dollar of raises or bonuses toward your capital-building machine. In the opening of this discussion, we examined the illusion of a government-backed retirement as a sacred and unbreakable promise that would protect us from the harsh realities of the future economic landscape. As we rapidly approach the critical 2033 deadline, the latest Social Security Board of Trustees report serves as a final siren call for those who are still sleepwalking through their financial lives and relying on a system that is fundamentally out of balance. The projected 20% reduction in benefits is not just a statistical abstract or a political talking point, but a direct threat to the dignity and independence of millions of American workers who have failed to build their own alternative infrastructure. If you allow yourself to fall back into the trap of dependency or the complacency of the crowd, you are effectively choosing to be a victim of a predictable crisis that could have been avoided with a decade of focused and disciplined action. The difference between a person who thrives in the mid-2030s and one who suffers through a diminished lifestyle is the presence of a personal margin of safety that acts as a psychological and financial buffer against systemic shocks. By following the mechanics of compounding and embracing the mindset of self-reliance, you have transformed the 2033 cliff from a terrifying abyss into a manageable hurdle that will not derail your long-term prosperity or peace of mind. You must remember that the greatest risk you face is not a market crash or a policy change in Washington, but the internal failure to remain consistent in your habits over a long period of time while others around you give in to impulsive spending. Success in finance is rarely the result of a single brilliant move, but rather the cumulative effect of thousands of small and seemingly insignificant decisions to prioritize your future freedom over your present cravings for status and convenience. As you move forward into this new era, keep the image of that original broken promise in your mind as a constant reminder that you are the only one truly responsible for the final outcome of your financial life. The era of passive reliance is over, and the era of the sovereign individual has begun for those who are brave enough to face the numbers and act accordingly before the system undergoes its inevitable restructuring. Do not let the noise of the headlines or the opinions of the masses distract you from the simple math that leads to ultimate financial independence and a life lived on your own terms. Your journey toward a secure 2033 and beyond starts with the decision you make today to live below your means, invest with intention, and never let the temporary comfort of a paycheck lull you back into a state of dangerous and unnecessary vulnerability. True wealth is the ability to fully live life on your own terms without the permission of a government or a corporation, and it is a prize that must be earned through vigilance and foresight. The numbers tell a story of a coming storm for those who are unprepared, but those who build their own shelter today will find that the rain only serves to grow the garden they have so carefully planted for their future selves. The choice is yours to make before the clock runs out on the old world and the new reality begins in earnest, where only the self-reliant will find the security they were once promised by others.